Councillor Wong Tam.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I'd like to move two motions, please. They're fairly similar, but I think they will allow members of Council to decide on the ones that they could support. And this is to amend motion number 5 and to simply insert the words to undertake an asset optimization study with the exception of the sale of Toronto Hydro. That's my first motion. And my second motion is to exactly the same and exempt the sale of the Toronto Parking Authority. And I want to put this on the table because I think it's important for us to be honest about what are we asking staff to do. And in my short time at City Council, I have now learned that the conversation of sale of assets has been on the table about once every term. And once every term, the members of this council have overwhelmingly said, we're not going to do it. And they were wise to determine that. So let's start off with thank yous, and thank yous to the city manager, thank you to the entire team to put together this particular report to kick us into the right direction, to send us off into the right direction when it comes to setting forward a plan, a financial plan that will make sense for the city. And we've often talked about going to other jurisdictions and trying to figure out how other cities do things better, whether it's New York or Boston or Los Angeles or Chicago. And I love Chicago, but there is a tale of Chicago that I want to share with you. And that tale of Chicago was a transaction that their city council approved in 2008 with the sale of a 75-year sale of 36,000 parking meters for a 75-year period. It was about a $1.1 billion transaction. It was brokered by Morgan Stanley, who assembled a consortium of U.S. and Western investors. And they were able to celebrate. They did it in quick order and said, wow, look at us. We just raised $1.1 billion for the city of Chicago. Well, the celebration was rather short-lived, unfortunately, because very quickly they learned that Stanley Morgan and those investors flipped over the transaction. And they sold the parking meters, or the lease agreement anyways, to a new consortium of investors, mostly residing abroad. Abu Dhabi is one state-controlled company that now controls the parking meters of Chicago. So they gave up governance and they gave up the 75 years of ongoing revenues that would have capitalized the Chicago coffers to pay for the benefits that those residents needed. And importantly, also to note, is that you no longer have control over your streets once you give up sovereignty. In this case, sovereignty goes all the way to Abu Dhabi. And so if you need to apply for a street festival permit or parade permit, the city of Chicago needs to ask the state-controlled investment arm of Abu Dhabi for permission to issue those permits. So be careful of what it is that we are doing. Another case for Toronto Hydro, and why I think it's actually important to have this conversation, is that Toronto Hydro currently contributes about $56 million to the city's coffers, and they did that this year. And since 2006, they have given the city back close to $500 million. That's one of the benefits of being the 100% shareholder of this public utility. And our city manager himself has said he's looking for sustainable long-term revenues. And he has said it's time to end this game of tricks that council has been playing. And we know what we know about public assets is that once they're sold, they're gone. And you only get to sell them one time. If you own your house and you sell your house, you move out, you don't get to sell your house again. Any revenues that you may be collecting as rents from the house are gone. So let's be really clear about what the sale of Toronto Hydro and the sale of the Toronto Parking Authority means, is that once you let go of ownership, it is gone. And when we're talking about political leadership in this council, I think it's also important to talk about political honesty. And I don't think it would be very honest for us to actually even pretend that the sale of Toronto Hydro or the sale of the Toronto Parking Authority is good political decision-making in the long run. You give up simply far too much and you're getting far too little in return. And if we are talking about private ownership, it also means private control. The same thing works for Toronto Hydro. The lesson that Chicago learned, which is something that I think we should take note of, is that control and management is something that we do collectively in the interest of the private good. And these are publicly owned assets, and I don't see any reason whatsoever why it's before us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Shiner. Oh, sorry, yes. Councillor Jamari.
Yes, I'm rising to declare an interest in the Toronto Parking Authority item that Councillor Wong Tan just raised. My son is employed by a company that does business with the TPA. So if possible, Speaker, would you be able to treat her motion as if it were two motions and have two votes, one that I can participate in and
Yes.
one that I can't? Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Shiner.
So, Madam Speaker, at Executive Committee, I listened carefully to our City staff presentation, and those of you that were there know that I had some interesting opportunities to question this City Manager on his perspective on this. And I found, really, when we talk about our long-term fiscal plan, that the issue really is the capital funding was in front of us. $27 billion that we needed, of which close to $4 billion was for public housing, similar amount, $3 billion for Toronto Community Housing, and $21 billion for public transit. And the issue I was raising was the fact that in all of the presentation, there was no acknowledgement of the fact that these were and should continue to be funded by other levels of government because municipal property taxes can't deal with it. And I believe that that's important because that's where the funding levels were at, and that's the only way to get these issues done. And no municipality has ever been able to fund major public infrastructure that's necessary for its future without significant funding from the other levels of government. And yet they also get significant benefits from that infrastructure when it's built, because what they earn back in income tax and sales taxes, as was an example with the Shepherd Subway, where $1 billion was spent and $1 billion came back for a net zero revenue. Those levels of government have to be involved. What the City Manager, in talking to him after, clarified to me was trying to point out is they're forgetting about us. They're looking at what we do, the fact that we've been able to maintain our business and our taxes the way they are. They think they're too low for the homeowners in the city, so personally, get out, Madam Premier, and talk to homeowners and ask which ones think they should be raised, because I don't think anybody in the city really thinks that they're paying too little. And understand the fact that we've done a good job managing what we have, but we can't manage the downloading. City Manager was saying, get real, they don't care. They're broke, they can't manage it anymore, they don't have any money left. So that's what this is about. And I didn't support it there, but in talking to the City Manager, I might just support the motions here today, because I think it's important to get on and think about what we can do and how we deal with that. But if we don't find that the provincial and federal governments come back into the funding of social housing, of public transit, and do them on shared programs with the cities, then we're all going to fail. Because the recent article about, look at what's happening with $3.5 million and you need transit infrastructure, my goodness gracious, that transit train has left the station, traffic is horrible in the city, people can't get around, and the only real plan that's on the table was the one that the Mayor brought forward right now, which is actually moving forward, and that may not be the best, but it's something that's moving. So we have to remember that. But I can't support necessarily the selling of our assets, such as talking about selling the Toronto Parking Authority. Because if you sell it holistically as an entity, then you're missing the value that that real estate might have if you put it through a real estate company and upzoned it and sold it and partnered on it.
Absolutely.
So you can do things like that through looking at the real estate and still make money on the meters. I can't look at selling hydro after the experience I recently had along a hydro corridor where we have a dog park, but hydro won't let us put a bench in. Yes. Ever since they've sold part of it, there's new liability concerns. There's metal in a bench. So I guess lightning's going to come down from the heavens and strike that one bench. So when you're standing at the dog park with a steel fence around it, you can't have a bench because it has a metal brace in it. It's gone down to the point where it's too difficult to work with. But I believe that the city manager can work strategically through these issues, can find a way to identify the areas that we may have to deal with, and that we may and do have to show some initiative to have some additional revenue sources come in that we can deal with to show that we're doing our best. But we cannot cover off what's here ourselves. It's absolutely impossible to think property taxpayers should have to pay twice, and I say that because we pay our taxes. Councillor, you're getting louder than I am, and I'm kind of loud. I don't think it's fair to think that we can raise anywhere near enough revenue to cover off the financial shortfalls that we're showing for those capital needs without having a level of government involved, and I think taxpayers expect us all to work together on that. And I'll support some of these recommendations from the city manager to see how we can do with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Minnan-Wong to speak.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of brief comments. On Councillor Matlow's referral, I think that's the absolute wrong thing to do. Due respect to the councillor. If one thing is certain in this report, what the authors say is we can't put off these decisions, and the one thing that Councillor Matlow's motion does is he puts off these decisions. Number one. Number two, with regard to looking at hydro and the parking authority, I don't. Firstly, if you want to pick out a poster child for monetization that's gone wrong, you could find one anywhere on the planet and find something that went wrong. The Chicago deal was the wrong deal. It was made. The agreement was structured badly, and if we were to look at any type of monetization, we could look at all the bad deals and make sure that we actually entered into the right deal. Secondly, with regard to monetization of any particular asset, we want to build a lot of things, but we don't have the money. And so we would monetize a capital asset to build a capital asset. So what I think we should be doing is having a discussion of, first discussion of what do we need and what do we want to get for that money. So the idea of just getting the money isn't necessarily as important as what will that money buy. Some of these councillors who don't want to look at monetizing assets want a lot of things built. There are a lot of councillors in the downtown that don't want to even touch looking at the parking authority or hydro. Yet these are the first councillors that are desperately trying to get the downtown relief line built, but have no idea how to pay for it. There's definitely consequences to selling a revenue-generating asset, but the reason why it's so valuable is because it generates that revenue. Nobody would want to buy anything that doesn't make a dollar. It just stands to reason. So you've got to sell something of value. And if you look at something like the parking authority, and you just look at, you don't look at selling it all off, you look at, I think, monetizing a piece of it, you could take that money and build that transit you want. You could take that money and invest it in the mouth of the Don. You could take that money to any of our big capital projects and try and move those projects forward, because the only way we're going to get those projects moved forward is to finance it. And if we can't finance it, they're never going to be built. So if you want to continue to build this city and find that money, you're going to have to look at some of the assets, some of those assets. So we're going to use the money from that potential monetization to invest in the city, to build the city, to build things like transit. And for me, that's a worthwhile thing to look at.
Thank you. Okay.